Hi guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Chris Wright. I'm a landscape photographer based in Granada near the Sierra Nevada. Now, I wanted to talk about metering today, and the reason I want to talk about metering is because it's something that will put you, the photographer, in charge of the look and feel of your photographs at a much earlier stage than post-processing. Now, I have a feeling that probably 90% of photographers stick with the default metering mode in their camera and never really go back and have a look at it. And in fact, it's tremendously important creatively. Metering sets out to indicate to you, the user, what a perfect exposure looks like. And it does this in several different modes, but it always uses the same fundamental algorithm to deal with this, and that is it looks for a circumstance, it looks for an exposure which is 18% grey. Now, what does this mean? This means that the balance of the tones across the area that's being evaluated in your metering equates to, on average, 18% grey. And this is something that all camera manufacturers are agreed on. And it's the thing that explains why when you take a picture of snow, it tends to come out underexposed. The reason is that snow is pretty much white across the board, and your camera is looking to guide you towards an exposure that's 18% grey. So when your camera indicates 0 on the meter, that is in fact going to be underexposed, and you need to compensate for that by either upping your exposure or using exposure compensation, depending what mode you're going to be in. Now, I want to go through all of the metering modes on the Canon camera, which is what I use almost exclusively these days. And at the end of the video, I'm going to indicate to you how to get around something which may be perceived as a bit of a shortcoming in Canon cameras. All right, let's get into it. So why is there a requirement for multiple metering modes? Why can't we just have one? Well, the answer to this is quite simple and straightforward when you think it through. If we take the default metering mode, the one that most people never deviate from, it's perfectly good for probably 85% of photographs, but it has some really glaring deficiencies for the rest of the types of photograph. And we're going to understand more about those as we move through the list of different modes. But why develop a different one? Well, the main metering mode, evaluative or matrix metering, is basically working on multiple zones across the entire picture, and it's averaging out exposure across the entire picture. And as I said, that's great for a lot of the time, but it doesn't hit the spot where you're dealing with particular types of photographs. So we've already mentioned snow. What if we were taking a picture of a bird perched on a telegraph wire against a bright blue sky? Now, what you're going to find in that case is that the majority of the picture is much brighter than the bird, and what you're going to get from evaluating that entire picture is a very dark bird, because it's going to average out the exposures across the entire picture, including the bird, but the bird is not occupying enough of the space to substantially move that average 18% grey target into an area where the bird's going to be well exposed. So what you're going to get is a silhouette, and that may not be what you're after. So just from that simple example, we can see that there's an advantage in restricting the area that the camera evaluates under certain circumstances to get a more accurate reading that are going to give you a more accurate representation of of a perfect picture. So this is moving theory, 18% grey, much closer to reality, and the way that it does this is by reducing the amount of the picture that it evaluates. Okay? So evaluative or matrix metering is the default mode that cameras are supplied with. Typically, the camera will evaluate multiple zones across the entire screen to arrive at an average for the whole picture. This mode is excellent for landscape photography. Anything where you've got a big variety of tones across your picture, evaluative metering will do the job. What about circumstances where you've got something slightly different? Evaluative mode factors in the area that you're focusing on, so it weights its average towards the thing that you're actually focusing on. So this kind of gets it out of trouble a little bit and makes it more sympathetic to your requirements as the photographer. But let's have a look at the next mode now, where we are reducing the amount of the screen that the camera is using to evaluate the exposure. Center-weighted average is a mode which evaluates 60 to 80%, depending on which camera type or model you've got, of the pixels in the center of the screen. So what it's doing is effectively you're pointing at the subject and it's giving a large bias to that area, 60 to 80% in the middle of the screen. So it factors in the outside as well, so you're moving away from evaluative metering towards a much more heavily focused in the middle of the screen kind of metering. And this is really good if you're doing, say, sports photography, if you're doing, a wildlife safari and you've got a pride of lions in the distance. It's something you just want to zone in a little bit more so that your subject doesn't get lost in the entire picture. So what about something a little more exacting? Well, Canon have a mode called partial metering. And what partial metering gives you is an area at the center of the frame, like center-weighted average, but it occupies a much smaller percentage of the total of the frame. So in Canon's case, this is approximately 6.5%, it's 6.2% exactly. So what is this good for? Well, it's great for probably macro photography where you're focusing in on a very small area. It's, again, it's probably a little bit better than the center-weighted average in your Pride of Lions scenario, depending on how close you are to the Pride of Lions. Good for things like backlit subjects, so the bird on a wire scenario where you're photographing against a big bright blue sky. You can evaluate that area which is effectively the bird itself, and then your metering will come out to render that bird in good detail. Okay, so that gets us quite a long way down towards a really exact pinpoint version, but there is one step further to go. So spot metering. Spot metering is the most exact by a long way. You're talking 1.5% of the entire frame, and this is, in Canon cameras, dead center of the frame. Now this mode is the one that probably a percentage of people that have moved away from evaluative metering are probably familiar with spot metering, but really it's chalk and cheese. These two things are extreme ends of a big spectrum, and spot metering isn't ideal for everything. What spot metering is great for is wildlife photography where you're focusing on the eye of the animal that you're photographing. It's great again for more exacting types of macro photography where there's an area that you absolutely have to have in pin sharp focus. But it really is a big difference. I mean, we're talking 1.6% of the screen, and we're talking on the other end 85, 86% of the screen. So massive difference there, and there are a lot of grades in between. So I think we've covered all of the grades that are available to Canon cameras. These are, I'm not sure about partial metering, but other brands will have their equivalent. So this, what we've talked about in this video, is certainly transferable to other brands. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that I'd have a little trick for Canon users at the end of the video, and here it is. Now, you'll have noticed as you've worked your way through the metering modes that there's a great emphasis put on the center of the screen. But what happens if the thing that if your subject is not in the center of the screen? Well, Canon have got this genius solution, and it's a button on the back of the camera, and it will lock down your exposure reading for 4 seconds. So there's nothing to set in the screens. No big deal. You simply point your camera at the thing that's the subject of your picture, nail down the exposure for that, and then you reframe and move the camera back to where the subject might be off center, and take the photograph. You've got 4 whole seconds to do it. It's perfect. Having said that, it's not ideal for if you're working on a tripod, but in the scenario where you're doing probably wildlife photography, you're going to be moving about a little bit. If you are locked to a tripod, then it's probably best to do exposure bracketing. Quicker, you just set the brackets up on your camera to do 1 shot either side of 0, or 2 shots either side of 0, and you've got those shots to either choose from, or you can blend the exposures when you get back in the studio. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. If you're subscribed, then please put a like on the video. It'll help get this out to other people that might be interested in metering. Otherwise, have a great week, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks a lot. Bye.